Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled Funding a Clean and Equitable Energy Transition. I'm Catalina Gonzalez from the Center for Progressive Reform. I'm going to be running through a few announcements before we begin. We can go to the next slide. Just to let you know, if you have any problems with the webinar audio on your computer, you can call in by phone using the information provided on this slide. We'll also add to the chat in just a second. All audience members will be muted during the webinar to cut down on background noise. If you have any questions during the discussion, please type them in the Q&A box. It's located at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A portion will begin at approximately 11:45 or 12:45 Eastern. At the end of the event, we'll close with some information and additional resources and ways you can get involved. Finally, this discussion will be recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel, and a link will be sent to everyone who registered and shared on social media. There'll be a slight pause now. I think we're already recording. All right, welcome to everyone. Again, thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled Funding a Clean and Equitable Energy Transition, How Lessons from California Can Inform Key Climate Governance Questions. I'm Catalina Gonzalez, the Climate Policy Analyst with the Center for Progressive Reform. The Center for Progressive Reform is a think and do tank. So we do both research and advocacy, and we convene a network of more than 60 member scholars, and we work to build thriving communities on a resilient planet. We drive policy reform with rigorous and accessible legal analysis designed for change makers. I'm honored today to be joined for this webinar by two experts in the field of climate justice. Before we begin, I want to share information with you about our climate justice project. The Center's Climate Justice Project. This project is, in addition, related to this report on funding. It also follows our publication of a resource called the California Climate Justice Index. It covers a set of web pages where information can be found on California's clean energy funding programs, how those are structured. It describes the key features of select programs. The project, in relation to this project, we also published commentary on the state scoping plan, its climate action plans, and we plan to do more of this work in the future. We're also going to be sharing with everyone some links so you can directly access this Climate Justice Index, which is really where this project was started. We started by providing this resource in response to a need that we heard from folks both in California and outside of California who really just needed an easy way to get a full view, view the full picture of how California implements its climate justice programs, how it makes funding decisions. So we provided this as a tool for everyone as a sort of to increase transparency for both folks working inside and outside the state. And so we're dropping the links and the pages. In the pages, you'll find the primary laws and executive orders that guide California's climate actions. If you go to that page, you can also find detailed descriptions of which legislations contain environmental justice provisions, and you can also see which ones don't. The Climate Index also includes detailed organization charts for the agencies most directly involved in implementing and planning energy and transportation programs. You can view those there. And finally, in the funding programs page for this resource, you can find sector by sector tables describing both how funding flows in California. We identify for you what the different funding sources are for climate programs in California, which includes funding from the cap and trade, from tax revenues. There's also ratepayer revenues from utilities that are part of that. And finally, we also have federal investments that have come online in recent years as well. So you can find all of those resources as well as detailed tables to give you a sense of who are the recipients in California's funding programs and what sectors California funds in.
All right, I'm going to make people a little dizzy and just back up for a moment and just
Well,
provide an,
before that, Alice, just for a second,
yeah,
to carry us forward, I want to
yeah,
introduce, great pleasure to introduce Alice Caswan. She's a professor of law at the University of San Francisco. She's also a CPR member scholar, and for a long time has been a nationally recognized expert on climate and environmental justice, and she's the co-author of this report. So with that, Alice, I'll hand over to
that's
you.
great. All right, so little bouncing around here, but I think we're all together now. So the overall goals here are to think about, given California's long track record, it's a state that's been working on climate justice and on funding transition for longer than anyone else. I won't say necessarily better, but for longer than any other state. So we want to think about what we can learn from California's experience, what should be replicated, and what could be better as well. So we're going to talk today about several themes and areas where we think other states can learn and where California can improve. One is how we structure state level planning and coordination. Another is how we tailor funding mechanism approaches. What are the different mechanisms and how are they structured? How can we best design funding programs to reach those who are most in need of the resources? And then finally, how can advocates and others participate in funding program design? Our roadmap follows that. We have already done an introduction to CPR's California Climate Justice Index to project and index. And then today's discussion will follow the topics that I just laid out. And then we're really looking forward to a conversation with Jessie Buendia, with Vice President of Sustainability for Dream.org and the National Director for Green for All. And you'll hear more about her later as we enter into that conversation. All right, so today's talk is really drawn from a report series that we completed on California's funding mechanisms. It's a 7-part series that has a lot of details, as you can see here, about the different aspects of the funding program that we analyzed. You can find a link both obviously on this slide, but also we'll drop one in the chat to the report series so you can look at the much more detailed analysis at your discretion. I want to start now by looking at the question of how California does or doesn't engage in comprehensive planning. There's a lot of planning that happens in California, in the transportation agency, in the housing agencies, in the energy and electricity context. But one of the things that we found quite apparent is a lack of really comprehensive planning, of looking at the whole, of getting a vision for how we want to have a clean and equitable transition here in California, and how that needs to be structured, both from a technological standpoint, but also in terms of thinking about what needs to be funded and how it should be funded in a more coherent way. So we think ultimately that and recommend much more comprehensive planning for what we could call a Green New Deal to achieve this kind of transition. That would require agencies assessing what it is they're doing, and then coming together to really look at the whole picture and make revisions in that analysis to provide a more thoughtful and coherent approach, one that would include advocates as well as state agency officials. And then there need to be changes. One of the, I think, reasons why we don't have this comprehensive planning is that the agencies have been given, very specific instructions, often from the legislature, to undertake particular programs, and these have emerged over the years. And many of the agencies are bound by the contours of those particular agency-specific programs. So we think if we engage in this kind of really overarching planning, it will require some shifts in agency authority in order to really come up with a program of action that doesn't just address one siloed aspect of a clean transition, but is more comprehensive. So we think it would be a big deal to engage in this kind of comprehensive planning, and something quite different from the much more piecemeal funding that we see occurring now. I also want to talk a little bit about cross-agency coordination. For agencies, right now you have a lot of agencies that have to some degree overlapping authority, so that more than one agency is dealing with weatherization or with transitions in the electricity sector, for example. And we think that a lot could happen more efficiently if we, with really in-depth cross-agency coordination. We also think cross-agency coordination could help meet recipients' holistic and multifaceted needs. There are lots of different needs that given household or a given community faces. And right now, those needs are being addressed by agencies, each operating, to some extent or to a fair extent within their own area of expertise. And we think more effective programs could be designed that would address the multifaceted need, again, both of households and of the communities in which they live. Now, California does have what I'll call the superhero agency. It's the Strategic Growth Council, and its mission is to coordinate and work collaboratively with public agencies, communities, and stakeholders to achieve sustainability, equity, economic prosperity, and quality of life for all Californians. And this agency contains, or is the Strategic Growth Council is a council of agency heads from a wide range of agencies. So it's an effort in California to address this problem of interagency coordination and includes many of the agencies that have a stake in the needs of households and communities and the needs going forward in terms of a clean energy transition. They do a lot at the Strategic Growth Council. They do have their own grant programs, and those grant programs often involve multi-agency engagement to try to address the cross-agency interactions. Some of the programs have flexible benefits so that communities that are using these grants can end up deciding what kinds of benefits they want to take advantage of rather than being limited to a particular type of benefit like a car or a solar panel. They also do a lot in terms of capacity building. As we'll talk more later, one of the big challenges in the world of funding programs is whether the households and communities have the ability to be able to apply for and manage the money they receive. So the Strategic Growth Councils works quite deliberately to help build the underlying capacity for lots of different kinds of recipients, for local governments, for community benefit organizations, for tribes, and others. So lots of folks and different groups who are served in that way. And then they provide a lot of resources and tools for agencies across the state. So they fund and conduct research, and they've been developing models and guidelines that can be of use not only to agencies in California, but really across the country. But one of the challenges here is that they have limited reach, right? There's still many, many programs that are operating within the state that may be influenced by some of the input from the Strategic Growth Council, but it's still not yet providing a really, again, comprehensive cross-agency approach to many of the challenges that the state faces. So there are some coordinated functions. There are, for example, in California, we have our own EnviroScreen, right? Our own mechanism for mapping communities that are marginalized or facing a variety of challenges. And that's something that all of the agencies can draw upon. So that's one example of a very usefully coordinated function. But there are lots of uncoordinated functions. So, for example, many agencies are undertaking their own outreach. They're doing their own applications for various programs. Even within agencies, there are many uncoordinated programs. So there's a lot that remains uncoordinated. So in California, I would say it could be worse, right? We do have the Strategic Growth Council. There are many instances in which there's, extensive meeting and work and planning between agencies. But still, for recipients, they are often confronting a kaleidoscope of programs. And again, maybe it's the poverty of riches. I'm not quite sure what the term is, but it's a kaleidoscope in many cases. Many community benefit organizations are, getting efforts at outreach by many, many different agencies and finding themselves overburdened in trying to help their communities and help the agencies that are trying to reach the communities. And there's some efficiency costs, right, to having these overlapping and uncoordinated approaches, both for the recipients as well as for the agencies. So again, as a starting point, in any case, we'd recommend that other states look at the Strategic Growth Council model at a minimum for information sharing and coordination of agency programs. And again, when it comes to really working on cross-sector, not just planning, but also cross-sector implementation, there's likely to be a need for legislative action, right, that will require and enable that kind of cross-sector work. And there'll also be a need for executive leadership. Many of these agencies operate, on their own. They have their own dynamics and budgets and things they need to meet. And it will require executive leadership to create some expectations within the agencies for the kind of collaboration and cooperation that actually crosses their boundaries. All right, so I'm going to turn now, speeding right along. There's a lot of content here. I'm going to turn now to talk a little bit in more detail, not at the meta level, right? What's happening at the state in terms of planning, what's happening at the state in terms of this coordination. But I'm going to turn now to talk about funding mechanisms. What are the ways that we go about funding a clean energy transition? So lots of mechanisms are individual. And by individual, I mean sometimes a person or a household or a business. These can take the form of tax credits. We've all heard of that, or rebates or vouchers, sometimes direct services. So for example, you may have an instance where there is often an organization that will come and simply install the weatherization or the solar panel or the battery. And then there are competitive grants. Less common in the individual household context, but for businesses, you can have competitive grants where they are have to apply to get the grant. And then there are community-based mechanisms, and these take a variety of forms, or do a variety of things, I should say. Some are these capacity building grants. And California, I think, has been a real leader in initiating capacity building grants for a variety of populations to help build their ability to, again, both apply for and implement funding, recognizing that many under-resourced communities simply do not have the resources to prepare for obtaining grant money. Then there are planning grants. So when you're talking about community-based mechanisms, often you have to figure out what it is the community or people planning on behalf of the community have to figure out what it is they want to do. So for example, California has the Transformative Climate Communities Program, and a key part of that is planning. How do we plan what it is that we believe stakeholders within our community need, whether it's investments in energy efficiency or in various kinds of mobility investments of transportation or in solar, distributed community solar or solar panels. There are also planning grants in the transportation context that are just focused on transportation, but allow communities to work on planning what their mobility needs are. Is it public transit? Is it a car sharing service to get that last mile from the existing transit to home or otherwise? And then importantly, of course, there are the very expensive implementation grants. So if a community is seeking to implement a new housing with transportation infrastructure, clean transportation infrastructure, or new public transit, or energy efficiency investments, then these are the implementation grants, right? And they may include components of other grant programs, but they are ultimately being put together by a community to be implemented cohesively into a plan for change. So those are sort of the individual versus the more place or community-based approach. There are trade-offs. I mean, community-based has some very clear advantages in that it is much less piecemeal than individual, right? When we're trying to think about a clean energy transition, and we're thinking, for example, about transportation, it's clear that the answer is not just handing everyone an electric vehicle, every household an electric vehicle, right? We need to think more comprehensively about what a community's mobility needs are and what investments need to happen. So these community-based approaches allow communities to think about what their collective challenges are and where the money is best spent. Also, particularly, and I'm not going to say all the community-based ones involve community planning. Some are more agency planning, but where there is a planning element, it fosters self-determination within that community. And many of these underserved communities have a history of low political power and a sense of that they have often been left out of political decision making. And so the planning element, I think, fosters an aspect of self-determination that is an important part of the environmental justice goals they're seeking to realize. Individual approaches are quicker often, right? If you're going to have a place-based planned community investment, it takes time to build the resources, to be ready to even plan, and then to do the planning. So individual resources can often be deployed more quickly. The amount of resources it takes, to do the planning and other work, it's probably less, right? For a certain amount of benefit, there's probably a little bit less resource investment that needs to happen. There are also communities where community participation is lacking. That could be for contexts where you need local government engagement, right? Community benefit organization can't run a public transit system, for example. So there are contexts where you have lack of will on the part of a local government. Maybe it's a small unincorporated town and the county is the one with authority and they're not interested, right? Or you don't have the community-based resources. There aren't people within a community that are in a position to spend the time and energy to do this. And then the other advantage of individual or at least context in which individual grants may be important are that some of the programs actually couple regulatory requirements, for clean trucks, for example, with incentive payments. And I think there's a sort of at least an argument that we want to be sure that the folks who are facing the regulatory requirement will be able to apply for and obtain the voucher to help pay for the clean technology that's being required without needing to sort of wait for or rely on some sort of community-based decision making. So I think there are places where both, for both community and individual, programs. All right. Another dimension to think about when we're looking at funding mechanisms is whether they are just oriented toward a single benefit or they're providing multiple benefits. And this tracks a little bit the individual versus place-based, but not entirely, right? So it could be an individual benefit like a clean car, right? Zero emission vehicle. Or it could be for a household again, but it could be multi-benefit for that household. So this is just a picture I've actually stolen from Pennsylvania. But it is a Whole Homes Repair Act, right, that the state had that focused on home repairs and weatherization and clean jobs workforce and job training, right? So it was addressing economic, weatherization, and other kinds of home repairs that might improve the health and safety of a home altogether. So multi-benefit, but still for an individual household. Single versus multi-benefit. the reason why we see so many grant programs being single benefit is because that's the way the house was built, right? We have agency structures and agency authorities that are generally built around a single domain and that reflect very particular expertise, right? So, the Energy Commission knows about electricity generation, and the Air Board knows about emissions and their impacts, right? They're very specialized agencies with often very narrow authority. And so the funding programs end up matching the agency structures. And I think that's what we have. So there's a huge inertia problem that we've got. Multi-benefit approaches are, I think, as we suggested earlier, much more holistic, right? They much better meet the needs of communities who are usually not thinking in the silos that agencies come along in. They're thinking about what they need in their home, right? They're not thinking about just the electrification aspect. They also, in the end, even though they may sometimes take more planning to accomplish, they can maximize transition opportunities, right? Because one thing is often related to another. While you may have one agency that does repairs for homes or focuses on housing safety, and another agency that does electrification, the two are often connected, right? You may not be able to put the electrical system into a house that is in substandard condition, or put the solar panel on, or do the weatherization, right? So you're often going to be able to maximize transition opportunities if you do this work together. If you install the water efficiency appliances at the same time that you're going in and doing the other work, for example. So, the gold star is interagency coordination for community-based and community-planned multi-benefit approaches, right? And Jessie Buendia, who's going to be joining us, is an expert on that. So, we know she knows more than we do on that front. But I think, again, there still is a role for some of these individual options. They may sometimes be integrated into the community-based programs, but we probably don't want to eliminate them and focus only on the community-based approaches. If we were to expand community-based efforts, again, they're probably going to require legislative authorization and an executive push because many agencies simply do not operate that way. Also, particularly when it comes to the capacity building, if we continue on the model where people have to apply for money, and that's a bit of an issue, but if we continue on that model, then it's not clear based on current levels of support that agencies are going to be able to really help communities come up to speed to be able to compete successfully. So I think there is a need for kind of a full range of nonprofit and philanthropic resources to supplement public capacity building efforts to help sustain community benefit organizations over time. And give them, long-term resources that will enable them to participate in this transition. All right, I want to talk a little bit about how we reach people in need when we're thinking about programs and program parameters. What are the ways? And again, there's a lot to talk about here, but if you want to reach people in need, you often have, especially for competitive programs, but also for first come, first serve programs, you often have much more demand than you have supply. And if you want to reach those who are most in need, you really have to tailor the eligibility requirements, or the resources will go to those who have more resources to apply, can get there faster, or provide the better application. So you really have to tailor. I mean, the need is way beyond what's available, and so you have to be very thoughtful about how you tailor it. We also think that certain populations are at almost a systemic disadvantage in applying for funds. Often tribal communities are deeply under-resourced, as well as rural communities, areas without a lot of local government support, especially unincorporated areas. And so in California, there's an increasing pattern of dedicated set-asides that are creating different pools so that places that are more resourced are not competing with places that are much less resourced. And then there are a lot of technical requirements that really create a lot of challenges for under-resourced communities with few resources. Matching fund requirements, shovel-ready projects, right? It takes a lot of work to get a project ready for a shovel. Data requirements, right? Knowing, being able to fill out the application and say what the greenhouse gas reductions will be from a given project. And then once you get a grant, being able to monitor and audit it in conformance with requirements that that government agencies have for how people spend the taxpayers' money. Lots of good reasons for many of these requirements, right? And yet at the same time, we also have to recognize the way that they can impede access. And so it takes some work to think about, again, when and where these are appropriate and how to get communities ready if we do think these requirements are there. Another consistent problem is that many programs are set up to reimburse people for the expenses that they incur, all on the assumption that the folks who have applied for the grant actually have capital, have money that they can spend to do the project, and then just need to be reimbursed for it. But many communities are lacking that. And again, this is something that California is trying to work on with some pilot programs to provide resources, or where nonprofits are working to try to provide resources in ways that'll enable community benefit organizations to wait, or even local governments to get some money up front from another source and then get the reimbursement. But that's something that needs to be managed. Another big issue for reaching those in need is access and outreach. Again, there are just so many in California, so many different programs, all trying, various modes of access, some of which do and some of which don't meet the needs of the recipient populations. But again, a lot of this could happen much more effectively if it were consolidated. And then once you reach people, if they're going to be able to take advantage of an opportunity, that capacity building and technical assistance is critical. And really one way to deal with both of these challenges is with one-stop shops, right? And whether that is new agencies, which we partly envision, new agencies that are designed to be the purveyor of resources as part of a clean energy and, transition, where they would help identify and combine benefits and connect people with the capacity building and technical assistance. Some of this work is happening at the federal level, interestingly, at least to some extent. So we may have things to learn from them here. And streamlined applications, one application for more than one resource potentially. So those are all things or ideas connected with reaching people in need. All right, almost wrapping up here. How do people participate in the design of programs? One of the challenges is that a lot of critical decisions are made at the state level. Many environmental and climate justice groups operate at the local level. Many critical decisions are made at the state level. That has to do even with the budgets, right? The awful lot is determined in state budgets in terms of what programs are funded year to year. And at the state level, policies and whole programs are often established, again, at the state level. So having a voice in the legislative decision-making is important, as is the governor's office, right? The governor, very important in terms of budgets and policies. A lot has been done in California through executive orders, which set forth policies that the agencies feel compelled to follow. And a lot happens just through the governor's leadership, right? The pressure the government places on the members of the various agencies that are accountable to the governor. Of course, the agencies are important as well. Most of them come up with yearly funding plans. CARB, the Air Resources Board in California, has been working really hard on its transportation equity programs to really engage communities in developing their discretionary funding plan, right? Some of it's dictated by the legislature, but they have some discretion, and they're really trying to get input on what programs to fund and how. And then there are all the program guidelines and manuals and handbooks, right? That set all the specific terms. Now, again, many of those are required by the legislature or by, you know, government policies, but some of it is discretionary, and being able to participate in those decisions is very important. So, how do you participate? Well, lobbying legislatures and governors is important. And then we think because of the challenge that many community groups face in being able to have access to legislatures and governors, we're also looking at the value of both compensated and ongoing agency advisory councils. So compensation is important. Advisory councils with community members in them deserve compensation because those community members are offering their expertise on what a range of community organizations and communities seek in state policies. And they need to be ongoing because those councils need to be developing expertise in the areas that they're advising and developing those relationships with agency officials that allow building trust and building communication over time. So we think those are really critical, may require coalition building and other things in many states where you have groups that mostly operate on a local level. But we think that's going to be important to shaping the fate of funding a clean transition. So with that, thank you. I'll let Catalina make a few closing notes on the technical aspects, and then I think we'll turn to a conversation with our guest, Jessie Buendia.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. You can stop sharing your screen, and I know Jessie also has some slides she would want to share with us. And while she does that, I just want to take a moment to just acknowledge all of the advocates, policymakers, and community members that we spoke to across the state and help inform this research, and just really elevate. I think a lot of what Alice spoke to, is in response to a lot of the concerns that folks shared, and the reason, we wanted to do this project on California and share with folks across the country is precisely because of that incredible track record California has of planning and deploying climate investments, for the better part of this decade. And so a lot of progress has been made, but there's still, things to work out and lots of information to share. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of those folks who contributed, and also to say that, for my background with community-based organizations, that's also brought to bear in this project. Great. And so with that, we do want to hear from really the expert. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Jessie Buendia, Jessica or Jessie Buendia. She's the Vice President of Sustainability at dream.org and the Green for All National Director. Jessie advocates for state and federal environmental investments that address both poverty and pollution. As a former deputy and acting executive director at the California Strategic Growth Council, Jessie helped develop transformative place-based and community-driven infrastructure investments, and is really the architect behind programs like the Transformative Climate Communities, which are now recognized as gold standard models that federal programs have been modeled after. So with that, Jessie, please share your slides with us, and please tell us more about your work at dream.org and how this type of analysis can help support some of the priorities that you're working on.
Well, I just want to do a huge shout out to Catalina, who really brought these amazing set of experts and community leaders together for incredibly, like you said, think and do tank. And I think that's right. It's like being able to bring the experts together to assemble the information and then actually get it to the people who can help influence and make these investments into reality and transform what is just like funding line items, on a budget into actual infrastructure projects that create jobs, that support the health and well-being of community members, and that help community people feel like they have agency in the decisions that impact their lives. That's what you guys all did in putting together this report. And so I just want to say I appreciate you before I jump into a set of slides. So Dream.org, we recently rebranded, and so many folks may not know who we are as an organization because Dream.org is our new name. However, Green for All has actually been around since 2008, and it was a program that was started in Oakland, California, right after California passed the Global Warming Act in 2006. And our founder, Van Jones, had thought, well, this is a great and exciting moment to solve two issues at once, which was to be able to tackle issues of poverty while tackling issues of pollution. And so working again with communities that are most impacted, coming from, again, heavily impacted, and by that I mean across all sort of various metrics and income, but also folks who are formerly incarcerated, coming back to communities without a lot of support, thinking about how do we create an inclusive green economy that's green for all and not just green for some. So I'm going to jump in. Thank you so much for giving me a few slides just to intro ourselves. And then I know we're going to jump into some Q&As. All right, so dream.org, our mission and vision of the world is to have a world beyond poverty, pollution, prisons, and polarization. Polarization is not often a common P in the social justice community because we are a national organization and we really focus on national, federal level advocacy. It really is about reaching all of the communities and communities of color across both red, purple, and also blue states. I think Alice just did a great job, in talking about why climate equity and climate action cannot wait. But as an organization that focuses on federal level advocacy, not only can it not wait, but also for the first time in a decade, we have some of the best tools under our belt to help realize some of the goals of our climate equity agenda. And that includes the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a $369 billion climate investment package. As many of the community groups who were interviewed for this report knows, is that just because a policy gets passed doesn't actually mean that it gets realized. And so for us at an advocacy level, making sure that we're tracking all of the dollars and making sure they actually go to the fullest intended use, both of the federal legislation, but also of the executive orders like Justice 40, that we actually get the investments to the communities. There's about 99 steps along the way where that might not happen. And so having a government watchdog in your corner is really important. So what does that look like for us? If we're successful, we will see the delivery of community-supported climate and clean energy infrastructure in the communities most impacted by poverty and pollution. But not just that, we hope we'll actually be able to create work and wealth opportunities for communities of color. This is our team. We are primarily people of color-led organization across the field. We have finance experts, we have campaign experts, we have policy experts, we have community organizers, technical assistance providers, the gamut. We have a significant digital engagement arm to our work also. But it's all people come together because they really are passionate about the intersection of both climate, economic, as well as racial justice. And our theory of change is that, some of these climate equity outcomes just don't happen, by passing a piece of legislation. You actually need to be able to provide planning support, technical assistance, mobilization, awareness, bridge building with having folks work together who haven't historically worked together, in addition to the administrative and legislative advocacy agenda. But if we're successful, we hope to be able to realize Black and Brown investments in Black and Brown disadvantaged communities, but also these climate equity projects led by Black and Brown businesses. This is my money slide, and I feel like Alice and Catalina, but all of us government nerds out there would appreciate this money slide because it really helps describe to people about how the money will flow and and why it's important to track the federal government funding landscape in detail. And that's because there's a lot of government agencies, both at the federal level as well as the state level, who are administering these funds, writing the guidelines for these funds. They have different rules related to their application process. There's different levels of community engagement associated, and of course, also different eligibility requirements and recipients. And so sometimes the recipients are nonprofits, other times they're local government, other times they're state governments. And so all of these details are important to be able to see how the funding can then show up in a community that's been impacted and that's obviously incredibly deserving. We at dream.org, we do operate not just in California, we are in all of the following states. In these states, we do state level legislation and advocacy, but we also do place-based technical assistance as well as market development work. You'll notice that, while California is considered a traditional blue state, if you've ever worked as a state agent for California, there's actually plenty of pockets of red districts, that are deserving of infrastructure and investment, and obviously are also going to be dealing with the impacts of climate change. But by design, we try to be in purple states, so states that don't already have significant, climate advocacy constituencies. We work really closely with our entrepreneurship network because we really care about wealth building as being an outcome, not just decarbonization, but really thinking about this opportunity to build an inclusive green economy as an opportunity to be able to decrease the amount of inequality that exists across the racial divide. We work with a lot of entrepreneurs, who are developing, again, both cutting edge, but also scalable technologies in the green sector. And so these are just a few of our entrepreneurs within our network. As I mentioned to you, a big part of our work is educating people around the fundable categories related to the Inflation Reduction Act, but also helping build demand for this kind of climate infrastructure from the bottom up. And so when we go and meet with communities and community leaders and legislators, people often don't know what is actually fundable. What is a green infrastructure project? What does it look like in their community? Do they know that it also funds community education and outreach programs in addition to the hard infrastructure? These are the things that begin sort of opening up people's imagination about what can this actually look like in my own community. And then I'll just end with, we're principally driven by the fact that climate equity and economic justice can only be possible with deep community engagement. And so that's really at the centerpiece of all of the work that we do. As a national organization, we make it a point to really design all of our advocacy by lifting up the local needs and desires of the community first, because it's very important that, again, we don't take a stance necessarily on what a community needs. It's really about community members identifying that for themselves. And so being able to bolster up the community engagement and technical assistance resources that are out there is a significant and huge part of our agenda. So that's just DREAM. And then I will hand it back to you, Catalina, for the series of questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jessie. That's incredible work that I think really builds on all of the foundation you laid here in California, which I think folks are super interested in, like getting a hold of. And I know, so folks don't end up reinventing the wheel in places where we've already got started. So yeah, I think like Alice, Jessie, you both talked about earlier, a lot of progress has been made in California, and we're constantly folks here are constantly innovating, like how do we direct more resources and share more of those benefits with communities that are the most in need and the communities that continue to be affected by fossil fuel pollution, right? Even as California sort of like leaps and makes progress towards our super ambitious climate goals, like there's still folks that feel like they have a sense of being left behind. So I just want to share like some of the concerns, and I think, we'll speak to some of the questions folks might have. Folks in California here worry that, do we have the level of investment to meet the need that's out there? Folks worry, that a lot of capacity is needed to, develop applications, do participate in the competitive process. That's a very like time and resource consuming process. People have concerns over how sustainable are funding sources. We have mentioned a lot of these programs in California are funded by our greenhouse gas reduction fund, which is maybe going to be renewed in 2030. We're not sure, but I think communities are looking for like more certainty that like continuous investments are coming. And then finally, that piece of like continuing to target the investments where they're most needed, and making sure we're plugging in federal investments as well to programs that are successful. So I guess with that, Jessie, like what, with all the work that you've done, that you're doing, what would you offer like in California? Where do you see kind of like the areas that are the most ripe for, improving the way we're funding and the way we're moving towards our climate goals? And if, you can, make a distinction with like things we can work on here in California and then in other political climates, like in other states where you guys work, where, we don't have not necessarily blue states, but more purple or red even.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of the best years, I would say, of my life and my career was getting the honor to work at the California Strategic Growth Council, which was designed to be able to bring the governors, like agency heads, to one space to have an integrated conversation about climate solutions. And Alice was so good at being able to talk about the urgency and the need of thinking about climate through an interdisciplinary lens. And I would say that is both academically correct, but also a demand from community members who don't live in isolated like ways. They don't have like just one singular housing problem or one singular transportation problem or one singular land use problem. They're actually thinking about developing their communities and seeing whether it's viable to be able to have generations of their own families be able to stay in a place, or whether they need to both leave their local communities or leave the state as a whole. And so these are, again, decisions that people are making every day, because the actual impacts of the climate, again, tragedy that we're in is that some of the solutions are just not keeping pace to the amounts of impacts that we're seeing across the country, and specifically across the state of California. And so to your question about whether or not we have the actual amount of money we need to solve the problem, the answer is no. And that's because the solutions that we need are in the trillions. In regards to actually readjusting an economy into a non-fossil fuel dependent economy, it will be trillions of dollars. And again, to be able to deal with the impacts of weather-related changes, to both economies, to ways that people are able to live, work, and play, like all of that will take a lot of money. But that, I don't say that in a don't be unhopeful way. I think that Alice was really good about talking about how sometimes it's not even about how much money, it's about being able to be smart about how you use the money. And we probably have one of the most inefficient systems around tackling climate change, again, because of the fact that we work in such tremendous amounts of silos, both at the local, state, and federal level. So what I propose, and again, having been one of the people contributing to this report, but also excited about the sort of chorus of community and expert leaders who are part of this report, I do think we need to have an integrated community-focused lens to funding that really lifts up a place-based model. And if we can continue to be able to bolster the kinds of integrated models that the Strategic Growth Council has been able to model through the Transformative Climate Communities program, or through its Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, as well as the capacity building efforts that we have through our regional climate collaboratives, what they call PACE. I think that we'd be able to actually make a lot more headway. And the investment that the state of California makes in building community support, community empowerment, and community vision will actually go a long way in being able to competitively draw down state and federal funding opportunities, as well as being able to bring in private sector funding. And so we often don't talk about the role of private sector funding. And so when the opportunity does come up for me to answer the question about the federal landscape and why it's unique and different and why there's an opportunity right now that needs to be leveraged for California disadvantaged communities, I'm happy to address that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for offering those examples, Jessie, and putting things so concretely. I know that, yeah, folks in the chat are, raising, similar question of like, how do we grapple with the kind of the timeline constraints that we're facing with like needing to build so much capacity in this moment, and also the urgent need, right, to deploy funding and to, develop new technologies and get things like out the door. Sort of like, how do we grapple with that? We know, lots of states, including California, as we're, developing new initiatives, unfortunately, lots of states, including California, facing budget shortfalls this year. So it's like, what kinds of programs, what kinds of like types of programs like the ones Alice, mentioned, or what types of mechanisms like do we prioritize in this moment?
Do you want Alice to answer, or would you like me to answer?
Either, yeah, either.
How about you, Alice? Go first, and then I'll chime in.
On the value of prioritizing integrated community-based approaches. But I think part of the challenge is to really ramp that up is a long-term process, I think, to some degree, just because of the siloed nature of agency authority and the like. So it did programs. So California did this by legislation, authorized the Transformative Climate Communities program and the Strategic Growth Council. And then EPA has a program. You may know a little bit more about the block grant program that EPA is running, the community change grants, I think they call them now. But those are we're authorized basically through the Inflation Reduction Act. How exactly are they doing the interagency coordination with the community change grants? Do you know more about that, Jessie?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, and I'll just say, in regards to just the importance of having an organization like the California Strategic Growth Council in California, is that it is unique. There are not very many, if any, other states that have an interagency department like the Strategic Growth Council to, again, help facilitate state advocacy or state coordination around climate change and land use and long-term planning. In addition, you may not know this, but they play a very important educational role in helping inform, again, the development of federal programs that could be able to lift up, again, the best practices that were established here in California. So actually, even before the Inflation Reduction Act got passed, the Strategic Growth Council was giving guidance and support to the EPA about what does it look like to actually develop technical assistance programs? What does it actually look like to do place-based investment, centered around environmental justice principles principles. And what would that actually look like if they were infused with a funding source? And so we actually have an amazing colleague, Alex Gallo, who is at the EPA, who was at the Strategic Growth Council from the TCC team, who is helping shape the community change grants. And so what they have as an advantage that SGC didn't have is that some of our best practices were developed over years of stakeholder engagement. And that is both around the program design and guidelines. And so when Alice said to be engaged, in the rulemaking and the policy guidance, it really is like the devil's of the detail. But as some of the first ever grantees, whether it's the city of Fresno or Riverside or Sacramento, went through the process of doing an integrated climate approach to its projects, they had an open feedback loop back to the Strategic Growth Council to inform what was working and what wasn't working. So now the community change grants that have an open application process that closes this fall in November, it is unfortunately one-time funding, and that's because they're trying to get the money out the door before the elections. I don't think that they would say it that way, but I will say it for them. But it does have some of the benefits, of, again, 7 years of learning in California, which means that there is advanced pay principles, that there's technical assistance embedded, both in the application stage as well as the implementation stage, that it requires, again, like a menu of investment options that communities can choose from to create competitive proposal, but that they're really evaluated based on the amount of community engagement and buy-in that they're able to facilitate, and then a governance process to oversee those investments over the life of, again, the infrastructure build out. And then they do have leverage funding requirements, but they're lower than they have in California. And more importantly, they're really intentional about infusing the tribal set-asides, like a very special focus on unincorporated communities. And then also just making sure that it is, they're going to be geographically, while it's a first come, first serve, they do care about like the geographic representation across the country. And so the way that it was developed in federal government right now, the not perfect equivalent, but what the federal government has is the Council of Environmental Quality. They do some of the important NEPA guidance decisions. They put the screening tool together. They also have an EJ scorecard, which monitors the Justice 40 accomplishments of the agencies. And then there's agency leads that then collaborate with each other. It's not resourced in the same way that California is. It doesn't have the kind of legislative structural support that California has given its interagency departments, but there is at least a lot of staff level momentum in making sure that they're thinking and across silos in order to, again, better serve communities.
Thank you so much, Jessie. That's so incredible. You really are just like the mastermind of like how we make progress in this moment. So I know we're over time. I just want to thank folks for sticking around. And yeah, just thank our experts, Alice, Jessie, for joining us and sharing your expertise with us today. We will be following up with a recording of the webinar, as well as all the links that we provided today. Yeah, thanks everyone. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you.